Party of Communists, USA, Educational for December 2025, Perils of Fascism by A.B. Magil and Henry Stevens, The Crisis of American Democracy, Part 2. Accelerating the struggle between democracy and reaction is the maturing of a new economic crisis, a crisis hastened and intensified by a sit-down strike of economic royalists, who withhold capital investments and engage in other forms of sabotage in a desperate effort to defeat Roosevelt's New Deal program and to drive the country along the path to fascism. The crisis continues today, as it did in the 1930s, as the monopoly capitalist class makes record profits at a time when the cost of living is rising and the workers bear that cost. Just as the political program of big business has tended to deepen economic crises, so, conversely, does the economic crisis accelerate the development of fascist tendencies of the ruling class. The corporate overlords attempt to maintain their profits by all means and to compel the people to shoulder the burden of the crisis. They attempt to cut employment, wages, and relief. In order to put through their program of unemployment and hunger, the economic royalists intensify their efforts to regain complete political control and to break down popular resistance by all means, no matter how violent. At the same time, the outbreak of a new crisis creates fertile soil for demagogic agents of fascism, for a new crop of Huey Longs and Father Coughlins in Donald Trump, Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro, and Nick Fuentes, among others. To state the conditions for making the growth and victory of fascism is to suggest a program of action for those who wish to preserve and extend democratic rights. The most essential and immediate task is to develop and strengthen the democratic movement, welding it into a single democratic front, all groups and all strata whose interests lies with progress and against fascism and war. Regardless of differences in ultimate aim, unity of all progressives is both possible and essential on the pressing issues raised by the threat of war and fascism. We firmly believe in socialism as the ultimate solution for the American people, but realize that the vast majority of Americans do not yet share this viewpoint. However, such differences need not and must not become an obstacle to a common front against the reactionaries who threaten the living standards and democratic rights of the people. The non-socialist progressives may ask, why should we unite with those who want socialism, and who say openly they think the People's Front will ultimately give way to socialism? Our answer is thus. We grant you, non-socialists, the right to believe that the ultimate outcome will not be socialism, but in the meantime only our unity and common front will prevent fascism from being the immediate outcome. Therefore, it is better to continue our debate behind the common line of defense we set up against fascism, which would stop all our discussions. There are those who see, or profess to see, an insoluble contradiction between socialism and the People's Front. Petty bourgeois radicals and ultra-leftists, under the influence of anarchism, Maoism, and Trotskyism, even pretend that the People's Front is a dangerous obstruction to socialism. Such a viewpoint has nothing in common with the theory and practice of socialism. Socialism can replace capitalism only when a majority of people are prepared to accept the change. The People's Front is therefore the present link in the development towards socialism, since, in fighting against the immediate danger of fascism and war, it sets into political motion the great masses of people and establishes the popular coalition, led by the workers, which alone can achieve socialism. The People's Front is not socialism, and no sincere and informed exponent pretends that it is. But in the construction of a fighting progressive popular coalition, it vastly facilitates the transition to socialism. However, even the development of a strong People's Front cannot entirely remove the danger of fascism. So long as a handful of economic royalists control the economy of the country, American democracy will be threatened. In an America that is democratic in form and plutocratic in substance, as Secretary Ikes phrased it, there will be forces continually at work to frustrate democracy. The economic royalists will continue to use their vast economic resources to nullify the will of the people and to impose upon the country the hateful system of fascism. In France in the 30s, the People's Front checked the growth of fascism, but the 200 families controlling the economy of France ceaselessly hatched conspiracies, like the plot of the Hooded Men, to destroy democracy. Democracy in America will be completely safe only when the means of production are transferred from the hands of the plutocratic few into the hands of the people, when socialism replaces monopoly capitalism. Only in a socialist society, where the power of organized wealth is completely broken and the national economy socially owned, is democracy safe from the destruction by a desperate plutocracy. At its best, democracy in capitalist society is restricted and dwarfed. The very nature of capitalism, which rests upon the exploitation of the great majority of people by a small handful of capitalists, cripples democracy. Democracy is confined within narrow limits in a society, where at one pole a small minority live in idleness and luxury, while at the other pole are the vast masses of people who produce the wealth of the nation, but who live in insecurity and poverty. Democratic rights, the right of free speech and free assemblage, are distorted almost beyond recognition when a handful of rich own the newspapers, movies, and radio change then, social media, tech companies, and news media today. The doctrine of political equality is distorted when working people are kept in economic slavery, while moneyed interests are allowed to buy the political system. Socialism creates an infinitely richer democracy than is possible in even the freest capitalist society. It abolishes the exploitation of man by man and the division of society into classes. It ends the anarchy of capitalist production, which compels millions to starve in the midst of plenty. It permits the full planned use of the whole productive equipment of society. As the 1936 Constitution, drawn up under Stalin's guidance, demonstrates, socialism alone can guarantee the right to work, the right to leisure, the right to full social security, the right to education. Only socialism guarantees real economic equality to all citizens, regardless of race or nationality. In his report on the draft of the new Soviet Constitution, Stalin pointed out, bourgeois constitutions usually confine themselves to fixing the formal rights of citizens, without bothering about the conditions for the realization of these rights, about the possibility of their realization, about the means of their realization. They speak about the equality of citizens, but they forget that there cannot be real equality between the employer and the worker, between the landowner and the peasant, if the first have wealth and political weight in society, while the second are deprived of one and the other, if the first are exploiters and the second are exploited. The distinguishing feature of the draft of the new Constitution consists in this, that it does not limit itself to fixing the formal rights of citizens, but lays stress on the question of the guarantees of these rights, on the question of the means for the realizations of these rights. Objective conditions in the United States are more than ripe for socialism. The economy of the United States, like that of the rest of the capitalist world, has reached a point where it can no longer expand within the confines of the capitalist system. The conflict between the enormous productive forces, which capitalism created, and existing social relationships approaches the bursting point. Now chronically, and not merely in periodic cyclical crises, machines are idle, while people suffer for lack of clothing and shelter, and foodstuffs rot in the fields, while millions go hungry. Two cataclysmic economic crises have occurred since the First World War, and today one continues from at least back as far as 2008, if not earlier. These are the gargantuan death throes of a decaying system. The dream of the modern Jeffersonians is the dream of an industrial democracy, and that can be realized only under socialism. The transition from the dying order of capitalism to socialism is not automatic. It will be achieved only after a long series of popular struggles, in the course of which a majority of the American people will learn that socialism alone can guarantee them peace, prosperity, and progress. But this is not yet the order of the day, since only a minority today accepts the socialist system. At the present historical moment, the issue is fascism or democracy, war or peace, barbarism, or the advance to higher levels of civilization. The choice lies with the American people.